Hey, what's up everybody? Thanks so much for tuning in with me again for another video. Sorry it's taken me so long to get a new one out, but you know how life is. It throws some things at you, you get busy and all that. So without delaying any further, this that you see in front of you is the app I want to build today. It's a little timer app, like a countdown timer. But what's neat about it is that this top portion here, without the two bottom buttons, is all SwiftUI, but that sits inside a UI view controller. So these buttons are actually UIKit buttons, and this is a UI view controller, and this is the SwiftUI view. So I thought it'd be interesting. I had to do something similar for work, and I thought this would be a neat thing to do a video on, where we can show how we would control a SwiftUI view from a UIKit context. And so just to show you how it works, we have two steppers here. One can increment and decrement by 1, and the other increments and decrements by 5. So we get nice little animations there. When you start the timer, you'll see these buttons become disabled. You can pause the timer. The buttons update with their color and their text. You see this nice countdown track here. The numbers update in the middle. And once the timer is actually finished counting down, then we'll see a nice alert that pops up at the end saying, hey, you finished the timer. So I think it's a neat little project. I can't wait to dive into this with you. Before we're going to get started here in just a second, but before going forward, I want to show you that, and I'll have it linked below. We have a repository right here where you'll grab the starter project. There's just some things like custom colors and some project setup that I just didn't want to waste time with in this video. And once you clone it, you'll want to switch to the starter branch, and that's the branch that'll have all the setup for you and everything. And just to walk you through that real briefly, this is what it'll look like. And you can see everything's neatly cleaned up in the navigator pane for you. Inside the app folder is where you'll find the scene delegate and the project setup to launch programmatically. All the storyboards have been removed. And inside the resources folder is where you'll find all the custom color assets here. So you'll see me using those throughout the video, and this is where those are coming from. And then inside the view controller, I have a lot of the UIKit stuff set up. There's going to be some stuff we'll do at the end of the video, but I wanted to take time to just get this set up because this isn't really the point of the video, but I just wanted to walk you through it real quick. So here we have two of the UIKit buttons, the reset button and the start stop button. They're both using this button config function because I didn't want to repeat any code. So this function right here just returns back a UI button configuration. And so we're using that here. And then this button config actually uses this function, this headline styled string, which is right here. And you can see this just returns an attributed string with the headline styled font. And then we have a button container, which is just a UI stack view that holds both of the buttons, the reset and the start stop button. Then when we go up top, we're just adding that button container to the view, and we're just setting up its constraints. And then we just set the background color to the view, and that is literally all. So let's dive into building the rest of this out, and we'll see how we get along with it. All right, here we go. We're going to start a new file, and I'm going to call this timer manager because we're going to need some way to manage the timer. So I'm going to do a new empty file, and I'm going to call this timer manager, just like that. And what I'm going to do, so I'm going to do this a little differently because it's going to take too much time to just walk through every single little bit as I'm typing it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type everything out, and then I'm going to zip through that real quick, and then I'll come back up and talk about what we just did. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so we need some way to manage the state of the timer, and I think this enum is perfect for doing that. So we just have 3 cases here, so ready, running, and paused. And the ready is great because it just lets us know, hey, we're not running right now, but we are ready to be fired whenever the outside world is ready to do that. Then we have a state letting us know, hey, the timer is actually currently running. And this is a state letting us know that the timer is stopped, but there's still time remaining on the clock. So that would be paused. And the timer manager class also conforms to observable object. So that way we have these published properties right here. And we have these published properties are marked as this, so that way the outside world can watch these and react to their changes. And state is pretty self-explanatory. We have the default set as ready. Time remaining is how much time is left on the clock. And we have the default set as 1. And duration is the entirety, so like what the user wants to set it as. So if I go back to here, you can see the duration is 11 seconds right here. Then when we count down, 9 seconds or 8 seconds would be the remaining. So this is the total amount of time that the person has set on the clock. Now we have this end date property here. And the reason why this is important is because anytime you're working with timers, you want to use dates, because the timers, as the documentation will tell you, they're always going to be susceptible to drift. And you want your timers to be as accurate as possible. And the way you do that is using dates. So if you are or have been using numeric values for your timers, you'll get to see in this video how you convert the numeric values such as duration and all that to an actual date, and you can use that instead. Now this right here, since the timer we're using is going to be a publisher, before, if you were using a timer, you might have used the function schedule timer, and I think that one takes an Objective-C method and uses the selector method or the selector pattern, or however you want to call that. And there might be another way where you do it like via a closure, but with the publishers, in order to stay alive, it needs to have a cancelable actually manage its life cycle. And so we need this here. And the best way I can explain, the way that helped me understand kind of how it was working, is that picture this timer connector like an outlet, and picture the publisher, like the timer publisher we're going to be using, as like a kitchen appliance that doesn't have an on and off switch, but rather it turns on as soon as you plug it in. And then if you want to turn it off, you unplug it. And so that's how this is going to work with this timer connector. And then we also want to give the outside world, when I say outside world, I mean outside of timer manager. We also want to give the outside world a way to know if the timer has finished counting down. And so that's where this comes into play. And if you've noticed, this is marked as private because we only want the timer manager to be responsible for sending out the notice that the timer has finished counting down. And we're using pass-through subject here, which is perfect because we don't really care about the last value that was stored. So that's where pass-through subject comes into play. It's not gonna retain the last value that was in there. If you do want something like that, you would use a current value subject. But pass-through subject is perfect because if we're outside, we just want to get pinged when the timer gets when it's done counting down. And the way you know that from the outside world is by subscribing to this publisher, timer finished, which uses, as you can see right here, so this is just a computed property. If I wrote it like this, it might be a little more clear. When it uses this subject right here inside of the any publisher. So I guess this is it's like content essentially. And then this is how the outside world is going to be able to subscribe to those changes. So we'll interact with this from inside this timer state class, and then this is what is going to shoot that off to the outside world, broadcast it essentially, and then anyone subscribed to it is going to receive those changes. Now I wrote down these two mark statements, and one of them is private, the other one's public. We're going to write 3 methods under public. We're going to write something for starting the timer. And we're going to write another one for stopping the timer, and another one for resuming the timer. But we're going to start off in the private section first. We're just going to write 2 methods out here. And this is going to be how we set up the timer, and that's going to be kind of like the core part of timer manager. So I'm going to type out those methods, and then I'll come back up and we'll talk about it. Then we'll work on the public one. So it's going to be pretty quick. So here we go. Okay, so we have two methods, connect timer and disconnect timer. The connect timer, as you can see, we are basically plugging in the publisher into the timer connector. So the timer connector is going to manage the life cycle of this publisher. We're going to run it every 0.1 seconds on the main run loop inside, and we're going to run it in the common mode. This auto connect is basically what starts it up for us. And then inside the sync method, we make sure we do weak self here, so to avoid any kind of retain cycles or anything like that. And we're going to get the current date in, and then we want to make sure we have a self, so we unwrap that. And we want to unwrap that end date property here. And don't worry, we're going to set that. It's going to get set over here. And then we want to make sure the state is actually running. Because if it's not, then we don't need to connect the timer. It's already been connected. So, or sorry, I totally messed that up. Just if the timer, that means the timer is actually running currently. So then we want to do this logic down here to update it. So here, we're going to create a new time remaining property. So that way we can get the date here. So we say end date time interval since, and we grab the current date. So this one right here. So this value here should be shrinking and shrinking every time. And then we want to check that, hey, if it's still greater than 0, we want to go ahead and set our time remaining property up here with this one. And then let's go ahead and print it out just for some sanity checking here. We can just make sure, just so we can see what's going on. Then if it's reached 0, so it's not greater than 0 anymore, so it's actually reached 0, we need to come back here and stop the timer. So we'll use this method once we run it, once we write that out. Then we're going to call it, that means it's going to be finished. So we want to call that timer finish subject and send out that signal. And then, of course, another sanity check print statement here. We're going to print out timer finished. The disconnect timer is super simple. We just cancel the publisher out, and then we just nil out the any cancelable, so the timer connector, and then we just print timer stop to pause. That's literally all you have to do to stop it. So let's go ahead and write these three methods out. These ones are fairly short, and then I'll come back and talk about it. Here we go. Okay, so we're done writing all these three methods. We have a start timer method that just makes sure that the state is actually set to ready. And we also want to make sure that the duration is greater than 0, because it doesn't make sense to start a timer for 0 seconds. So then what we're going to do is we're going to set that end date to a date from right now, and we're going to get the date into the future. So adding time interval duration. So we want to take the duration here, so it'll be 10 seconds from this date, which is right now. So whenever this gets called. Then we're going to call connect timer, because that's going to start up the timer. And then since it started up, we want to make sure we set the state to .running. Then in the stop timer, we have this reset parameter, and we'll talk about that in a second. But first, we want to make sure that if the state is running, go ahead and disconnect the timer. So it's going to stop the timer. Then if the reset is there, it's true, then we want to basically reset everything. So we're going to nil out the date. We're going to set the state back to ready. The time remaining, we're going to set it back to the duration again. If the reset is false, so we're just pausing, then under the else statement, then we're just going to set the state to paused and print timer paused. For the resume timer, we do want to make sure that the state is paused. Otherwise, go ahead and return out of the method. Now, what's different from the start timer is you'll see that the end date is being set from the date until now, or date now and into the future via the duration. But with the resume timer, we want to pick up where we left off. So here we're using time remaining instead. And then the rest is the same. We want to connect the timer and then set the state to running. So in essence, you could probably make these into one method, but it's fine like this for now. So, and I think that is all for our timer manager. So now all we need is a view to showcase this. And so let's go ahead and build that out. I'm going to come up here and right click that, do new file from template. I'm going to leave it on SwiftUI view. I'm going to keep it simple and just call it timer view. Like so. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type out a bunch of stuff and then I'll come up and talk about it again. It'll just be easier and quicker that way, I think. So here we go. Okay, I think we are all set up here for our SwiftUI view. I'll walk you through this. So for the initializer, since this view does not own the manager, we're going to have it be initialized outside of this view. So that way other objects and things outside of it can control it. But we're making it so that it has to be dependent on the timer manager. So hence this is a dependency injection. So we're forcing it to depend on this. And it's marked as observed object because this is an observable object. And then we have two state properties, one for the timer value, and that's to manage the value for these steppers here. And we'll walk through that. And this other one is for when the alert shows. So we just have two state properties, pretty simple. And let me skip this for a moment and show you how we're managing the timer value. So here we have the two steppers here, and I'll show you this function down here. I just didn't want to repeat this code since it is kind of custom. Didn't want to repeat it in here, so this function just gives us back these views and it takes a step in. So how much is this stepper going to step by? And it's just a simple v stack with a label that we pass in the step. We use the plus minus to indicate that you can increment and decrement. Then just some styling here. And this part's important here, this stepper, where this is the on increment block and this is the on decrement block here. But in the increment one, totally simple. So we just take the timer value plus equals the step. We're all good to go. The on decrement, the thing is, remember earlier I said we shouldn't start a timer for 0 seconds because that doesn't make much sense. So we want to see what the future value is. So if they were to decrement say where they're using the one with 5 and say the value is currently 3. So if it's 3 and then we want to decrement, you'll see this doesn't do anything because it's calculating the future value. It sees that 3, so the current timer value is 3 minus 5 is -2. And so here it's actually going to be above 0. So we just return out of there. Doesn't make any sense to do that. But if it is below 0, so say we're at 6 like this, so the timer value, then it will go ahead and subtract that. So then we'll hit that, boom, we get 1. The other thing that's really cool is if I comment this modifier out, you'll see that the layout gets kind of weird, and that's because with a lot of these controls that Apple gives us with SwiftUI, they want to give you a label to the left of it. So if I put some text here, stepper or stupper, you'll see it goes to the left, but we want to hide those. It's neat that they give you this label as hidden modifier because obviously we have our own little labels up above them. So we just do that, and that's what that is doing. A lot nicer. Then we have the disable stepper so that if the manager is actually running or paused, we're not going to allow you to increment or decrement the value of the timer. You have to reset it before you do that. Then the trim value, what this is doing, this is how we're able to get the track, the correct value here. And the way we do this is we just say, hey, if the time remaining is greater than 0, then take the time remaining and divide it by the duration, and that's going to give us back the percentage. If it is at 0 or below or whatever, then just give us back 0 because then we don't need to go any further. So that's all that does, and we actually use that in this trim modifier right here, and this is what's going to trim the circle for us. So let me talk about that. Okay, so we just have a Z stack and we have 2 circles. So we'll see this one once it actually starts counting down, hence this secondary trim color. So it's the, if I go back to the finished one, you'll see that it's like lighter here. So we want to see that track there. So that's what this, this one does. And then we have the other circle that sits on top of it. So I already spoke about the trim value. Pretty simple here. We're just creating a stroke around the circle. And the reason why we have this padding here is because the stroke is, so if this is the frame of the circle here, the stroke would actually sit halfway inside the frame and halfway outside. So all we're doing is we just grab half of whatever the line width was. And then the reason why we need this rotation effect is because if it started counting down, it would actually start counting down right here. So this it thinks is 0 here, and it's going to start counting from here. So what we do is we rotate it 90 degrees so that it starts from the top and starts counting down that way. For the animation, the reason why there's a ternary operator here is because when the timer gets set back to ready, so it gets reset, I don't want an animation counting that. I'll leave that up to you. You can leave that. You can take out the ternary and just leave the linear animation there. I didn't want that. I just want it to be immediately reset back to where the ring was fully colored. And then when it is counting though, I want linear. That's the best one to use for this kind of timer because you want it to be exact. And then the duration is going to update every 1 second, but it's going to interpolate from the last position 1 second ago. So that's pretty nice. And the value is obviously based off of the manager time remaining. Then we have the overlay, which is the text here. I'm doing this max just in case, just make sure we get a nice value there for the time remaining, because that is going to be a double. So we're getting the max value, and then we turn it into an int. And then we're just some styling here. I like the mono-spaced look. They do have mono-spaced digit if you want to keep like the other type of font, but you still want the digits to be mono-spaced. I like the mono-spaced look though. Then this content transition is how we're getting the beautiful animation effects on the text. It's like amazing how you can do this with one single line. So you just do numeric and then counts down and then set that to true. And then we want animation on that text. We're using ease in out and then based off the time remaining, of course. We set the frame on that Z stack to 150. I just thought that was a good looking size. You can adjust that, of course, to however you want. And then this on receive, we want to know when that we're subscribing, right, to that timer finished publisher. And we want to be alerted when the timer is done. So then we set that state property to true, and then we react to that state property with this alert modifier here, and then we just show a button there and then we just in the action we just turn the is showing alert back to false, and that is literally it. So we don't have any way to run this timer now because we're going to go use it right now. So let's hop back into the view controller and we'll actually wire this thing up and use it. So here we go. Now we're going to follow the same thing here. I'm going to write out a bunch of code and then I'll come back and talk about it. And don't forget to import a couple things here first. So we want to use combine here. And then we also want to use SwiftUI. Okay. So I'm going to type out the rest of the code here and then I'll be back to talk about it in just a moment. Here we go. Okay, I think we're done here. Let's see, I'm gonna check a couple things. Content stack padding, that looks like that is the correct one there. Okay, so let's go over what we did here. Of course, you want to make sure we import combine and SwiftUI, as I said, because we're using combine right here. And then where we have our timer view, we're actually, by using hosting controller or UI hosting controller, that's a part of SwiftUI. So let's talk about this. So we're initializing a timer manager object. This is why inside the timer view, We didn't want to use state object there because it technically doesn't own that object. Here in view controller, this is what is actually owning the object because it's initializing it right here. It's creating the instance right here. So we create that for the whole view controller to use. We have this to manage the publisher. So we're going to subscribe to state right here. And you can see it's being stored inside here. And this is how you access the publisher state with the $sign right here. And the one thing, so this isn't going to be perfect. Yeah, we got a couple things to just clean up, very small things. But so we're going to run the sync method. And the reason why we want to subscribe to this state here in this view controller is because we need to update our UIKit buttons. As you can see from right here, when you hit pause, like you can see there's a lot of state that's updating these buttons here. And so we want to react to that state and, update the UI accordingly. So here we have title BG color, so background color. And I thought a tuple was just fine for this. We have it where it's a string and a color. And then with the new Swift additions, how you can use switch statements and if statements as expressions now, which is super awesome. So we can actually set that directly. We can assign it directly to these tuple properties here. So under the case ready, we want the button to say start and we want it to be the trim color. When it's running, we want it to say pause and we want this red color. This one I'm actually using the SwiftUI red. So I don't know if you knew you could do this, but use UI color and you can actually use the SwiftUI colors in here. This red is different from the UIKit one. I don't know why, but I actually like this red color better. And then for the pause, we want the button to say resume and back to the trim color here. For the title color of the buttons, I wanted just a little bit extra, some logic here. So if the state is actually running, that means it's going to be that red color, right? Because we see it's running right here. So I want it to be just the light color. In dark mode, I always want it to be that light color. So that's what this really is taking light and dark mode into consideration. And otherwise, it's fine if it's the button text. And then here we're actually assigning it to the button's configuration. So we grab the button, we grab the configuration, we use the attributed title, or we're setting the attributed title. Using that headline styled string again, we're passing this title in, which is right here. And then same for the base background color, we set it to the background color, and then the start and stop title color we're using from right here. And then we want to know when to reset or when to enable the button or disable it using, so it's going to be enabled whenever the state is not running. So then we get down to our timer view. This is the magical view right here, right? So we create the timer view, we pass in our timer manager, we create a hosting controller and pass the timer view as the root view. We're going to set the background color to clear because the hosting controller will have a background color there. We want to make sure that this hosting controller is able to size itself correctly. So we're setting its sizing options to intrinsic size. And when using a UI hosting controller inside of another UI view controller, we want to make sure that it knows how to, we want to make sure that the hosting controller knows how to size itself inside the UI view controller. And the best way to do that is to add it as a child. So we add it as a child view controller, and then we tell the hosting controller, we want to let it know that it did move to a parent view controller, and then we pass that parent in, which in this case is self. And then we return the view. Then we created this content container, and all you see is, or what you can see is that all it consists of is the timer view and the button container that we created earlier. The default axis for stack views is horizontal, so we got to set that to vertical. The spacing, we're using a new property that I created down below, which is the content stack spacing. By the way, this is a nice way you can, place your constants inside of a file, especially if you're reusing them a bunch of places throughout the file. If you're doing something for like localized strings and stuff, you can also do something like enum, content for something like this, and you can even set colors in here, things like that you're using constantly throughout the, no pun intended there, throughout the file. So so that's really nice. And the other good thing is then you only have one place to change that versus having to bounce around to different places wherever you're using, So it's a good way. It's a good practice in my opinion. But anyway, the next thing we want to do is we want to let the stack view do as much of the layout as possible for us, including those margins that we see on the left and right here. And we do that with layout margins. And the only way this gets respected is if you set this property to true, which is layout margins relative arrangement. You want to set that to true. That way this works. Okay, and we can just set in the left and right. That's it. And we also forgot something. So currently, let's copy this. You can see up in the layout stuff, it's only the button containers being added. So we actually want to replace that. Neat little trick here. So if you want to know how I'm selecting these like this, you can hold down Control and Shift and just double click these, and the ones you selected will stay selected, which is nice. And then we can Command V to paste. And so that's looking pretty good. We actually don't need, what happened here? Okay, there we go. We actually don't need these constants anymore because the stack view is going to do the padding for us. So see how much nicer that is? So we have those set, which is nice. We got the correct view that's being added and constrained. The other thing too is we'll go over what we did to the buttons. So this is obviously important too. For the reset button, really simple. We just reach into the manager and we call stop timer and reset true. That's it. For the start stop button, we are going to switch over the manager's state. If it's ready, we call time manager.start timer. If it's running, we call stop timer. If it's paused, we call resume timer. And that is it. We also forgot one more thing. I think I did. Let's get back and double check. If we go back in the timer manager, I'll bet you I forgot to call stop timer here. I did. So that reminded me. So here we got to call that stop timer, and reset is going to be true here. Okay, so let's go back over here. We could check out how this view looks by calling the preview macro, which is so awesome that you can actually use that for UIKit now, which is awesome. So there we go. We'll see what it looks like. And there we go. We can increment, decrement, go up by 5, go down by 5. Let's run this in the actual simulator and see what it looks like. So here we go. I'm going to run it. All right. So let's go and increment it a little bit. We'll decrement it and we'll start it. Okay, we see these are disabled, which is nice. We can pause. We get our nice animation here. We can resume. We can reset. And let's start up. Let's see if we get our alert as well. And bam! We got our alert showing. We have a nice timer built. And I think that's it. I think that's going to do it. I hope you guys had a blast building this with me. I know it was a lot of fun for me, and I think this is a neat little project. And hopefully you learned something. I always hope you learned something. If you really, digged working on this today, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. And until the next time, I will see you guys later. Hopefully it won't be another year before I put out my next video. So thanks so much for tuning in with me. Until next time, peace.